Do I think that people are experiencing more self-doubt than ever? Yes, absolutely. Let's just say if I'm really the problem and it is me, then why would I admit it? But so few people admit because they fear for their job. And no one wants that. But then that pressure causes more and more doubt.
Welcome to Toddle School Leaders Project. I'm your host, Cindy Blackburn, and on today's episode, I'm talking with Elizabeth Dampf. She's the author of the newest book, Am I Cut Out for This? And the book outlines 7 self-doubt archetypes, those feelings that creep in when you have to sell a new curriculum proposal or tackle an angry mob at your school. So in this conversation, we talk all about the mindsets and skill sets to really tackle self-doubt and to free yourself from the feeling of imposter syndrome. You're not going to miss a single second, so let's jump into this episode. Elizabeth Dampf, I'm so excited that it works to have you on today. Thanks for joining the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Cindy. I'm happy to be here.
I was so excited when I came across your book because I think it's one of those issues that so many leaders face and don't talk about. So might you tell us a little bit about your book and kind of the central topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is called Am I Cut Out for This? And it really circles around that question. I think that leaders face and struggle with internally, but don't often talk about, which is, am I cut out for leadership? And it examines issues of self-doubt and specific situations that all school administrators or even people in a leadership position as a teacher or other job might encounter, where they just wonder, is this really for me? Am I missing a piece? So it's called imposter syndrome or self-doubt or whatever you want to call it, but that persistent feeling of doubt that you might not be fit to be a leader.
Oh, I don't even think you need to describe it, but might you just describe what is that imposter syndrome? What does it look like? What does it feel like? When and where does it show up?
Yeah, I think imposter syndrome, as it's often called, is that feeling that maybe I'm actually not qualified to do this job. And people in all aspects of their leadership career, whether it's beginning leaders or even veterans, can have this sense that maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm missing a part. Maybe I'm not qualified and everyone knows it but me. And I'm just here, faking it, but I actually am missing a piece. And I'm not I have no business being in this role. And unfortunately, I think it shows up when we encounter something that we either didn't consider or have never faced before. So we feel either unprepared, or we're looking around wondering, was I supposed to learn this at some point? And then you think, well, maybe I was supposed to have something in my personality or something in my education, something in my training, and I didn't. And now here I am in this job and I'm not prepared.
Well, and we know that teacher, educator persona types tend to be a little more neurotic, a little more people pleaser. So I wonder if this is especially running rampant. Like, I'm sure in all businesses it's a present thing, but especially in the education world, it's especially dominant. Are you finding that the more you talk about it, the more it's coming out of the woodworks?
Absolutely. Well, and I think that the last really 10, 15 years in education have been such a roller coaster that talking about things you were unprepared for, there's a million of them, right? Not even before COVID, right? Even before COVID, there were things that people just don't learn in teacher school or in administrator school or in social worker school. And so as you're encountering these new things, you then think to yourself, well, golly, was this what I signed up for? Is this, or is it me? Maybe it's a me thing and not the world is changing thing.
I'm not the biggest Taylor Swift fan, but I feel like as you talked, I just kept, it's me, hi, like
Yeah,
soundtrack of your book.
that could be the anthem. So, yeah, and in terms of talking about it, I think people don't, and I think that that's part of the issue. So, do I think that people are experiencing more self-doubt than ever? Yes, absolutely. But I think that we're not talking about it because if let's just say, if I'm really the problem and it is me, then why would I admit it, right? I am in a situation where I don't want to confess that I feel totally out of my depth, and I don't want to confess that maybe I'm missing something, because of course my livelihood depends on my ability to perform in my job. And I think as leaders, there's extra pressure to project confidence and poise and calm. And so the idea of suggesting that you're out of your depth just doesn't resonate with people.
Well, ultimately, that's fear and shame. And we know so much about how like keeping shame quiet is the worst thing you can do because it just makes it grow. Um, One thing that you describe is that you describe reframing self-doubt as an opportunity to learn and adjust. So might you share how that insight kind of first came to you on your leadership journey?
Well, I think some of it was that I myself felt better when I started acknowledging the doubt. Not even necessarily aloud to other people, but that certainly helps, but just to myself. Just saying it and then reframing it helps. And so then, yeah, reframing doubt as an opportunity to grow. I think if you conceptualize in your own mind, hey, it's not necessarily that I'm missing a piece, but I still have room to grow. So you're not doing some surface level validation. You're not saying, I am enough and I got this, because those are really glib assertions, but they might not be true. I mean, that's kind of the hard reality, is that if I'm facing a situation that I've never faced before, maybe I don't got this, and maybe I'm not quite qualified right now to handle that situation, but that doesn't mean that I never will be. And it doesn't mean that I'm all alone, completely by myself, no one will help. But what it does mean is I need to acknowledge I'm unprepared, or I'm out of my depth, or maybe I'm not qualified in this moment, but I can be down the road. I just need to have that acknowledgement first.
Well, two concepts come to mind: growth mindset and agency. And what's so funny is that growth mindset has absolutely taken off. Like every school has posters on the wall of like, can you do it? Yes, you can. But it's funny that it's almost like skipped the leadership level. It's like, yes, we're saying that to our students, how important it is that we learn from our mistakes. Our brains get bigger from our mistakes, but actually internalizing that as an adult is so hard.
Sure. And I think it stems from this idea that you are done learning when you're done with school,
Mm.
and that you somehow emerge from your graduate program as this immaculate, complete, I now can handle everything leader. And if you think about the way that leadership programs generally work, one degree qualifies you for any number of jobs. So I could be a kindergarten principal or a district math coordinator. And knowing that that massive range exists, how could you possibly be prepared for all of the challenges of both of those jobs? And then, of course, we know that theory and practice are different things. So everyone who has earned a leadership degree can clearly conceptualize and write great papers about and participate in discussions on leadership theory. But then when you're in the heat of the moment and your emotions are running high because of something, and those you lead, their emotions are running high, and there's a couple of cogs that got thrown into the machine, suddenly theory is a lot harder to implement. And then you only need one or two misses, and we've all had more than one or two. I've probably had one or two just this morning, misses of your leadership theory, and then you think, well, I'm terrible. I have no business doing this.
It's like this creeping self-doubt that's lingering in the background, and every little mistake just kind of feeds it.
Well, sure. And we also, I think, see leadership as a trait of your personality. Either you are a leader or you aren't. And
Mm.
it's binary, and it is mutually exclusive. So if I'm not a leader now, I have no chance of ever being a leader because it's a fixed element of my personality, which also goes very much against the idea of growth mindset.
So instead, seeing leadership as a set of capacities or capabilities that you are fully capable of developing, as opposed to you're born with it or you're not.
Absolutely. I mean, we would never tell someone, oh, you can never learn how to play the piano. Anyone can learn how to play the piano. Now, it's true there are prodigies, and it's true that some people grasp it more easily than others. That is true of leadership as well as of piano playing. But everyone can learn. So, and with enough application and with enough practice, yes, you can develop those leadership skills. So, seeing it as a facet of a person's personality is damaging, because then you could be 10 years into your leadership journey and still doubting, oh, maybe I'm a fake. Maybe I'm not one of those people who was born to be a leader. Therefore, I'm awful.
Yeah. Oh, so powerful. Elizabeth, you wrote a blog for ASCD that absolutely took off. It deeply resonated with so many folks. Might you talk about some of the key messaging there, and why you think it resonated with so many people so deeply?
Well, I think it comes down to saying what people think but are afraid to say. And I
Uh-huh.
personally want to get past that in my life. I want there to not be quite so many taboo subjects. So, this idea that self doubt is actually ubiquitous, and plenty of people experience imposter syndrome, even some of the most veteran and experienced and wise and capable leaders, anyone can experience that doubt. But being able to say it out loud and acknowledge it, I think that's what resonated with people, because it's a dirty little secret that many carry, but so few people admit, because they fear for their job. They fear that if they say they're not sure how to handle a situation, they'll be perceived as incompetent. They're afraid that if they admit that they have doubt, then they'll be perceived as somehow lazy or stupid, or that they should be removed from their role. That the people won't follow them, right? So many principals, for instance, have staffs of dozens, even hundreds of teachers, and there's a sense that if I admit that I have doubt, am I going to lose the goodwill and the willingness to follow me from all my staff? And no one wants that. And so you feel more and more pressure to project confidence, but then that pressure causes more and more doubt. And so it's this vicious cycle. So yeah, I think it was saying the taboo thing and just admitting that doubt is pernicious and it's widespread.
Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Toddle, your all-in-one teaching and learning platform for K through 12 schools. If you're looking at how you can have curriculum, family communications, AI, and the student-facing platform all together in one integrated space, look no further than Toddle. We're awesome for competency-based schools and standards-based grading. Check us out at toddleapp.com. And now, back to the episode with Elizabeth. I love that. And then you kind of elaborate on that in your book. It's the same theme, but you really dig into these 7 self-doubt archetypes. And I love an archetype. I love, like personality tests and those different things, because I think it just gives you shared language, and it helps you see yourself, and it helps you see others and have the words to describe it. So can you talk about how you created those? Where do they come from? And tell me about your archetypes.
Yeah, I was trying to think through what are the most common instigators of self-doubt. And to be honest, I had a hard time getting it down to just 7, because I could list 20 common situations. So I wanted to go through things that every single leader, whatever their role, experiences at some point. So for example, the struggling salesperson, every single leader in every role in every district has had to sell someone else's plan as though it were their own, even in the face of resistance. And that is a common, but that's a really tough situation. And when you're in that situation, which unfortunately is more often than not in the early part of your administrative or leadership career, when you're on the bottom of the ladder and things are rolling downhill and you just have to be the face of them, right? But then you're standing there and you're thinking, am I dumb? I'm not even sure I can answer these questions. I'm not sure I can get my brain around this thing that I'm supposed to sell. And then you wonder, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Like, everyone else seems that they can sell this really easily. And here I am struggling to answer the first question I was asked. So that was my goal, was to think through what are the times when I personally have thought, oh man, I am the worst and I should just go and do something else with my life because this isn't for me. A couple other archetypes that came to my mind immediately. One, and I hate to phrase it like this, but it was the punching bag, right? When you end up just getting completely dragged over the coals, either by your supervisor or by someone you work with, even someone you lead, and having that emotional response to someone else screaming at you or accusing you or threatening you. And that is a sad part of leadership, but you then have to be able to frame it in a way that you can control your own emotions, that you can control the next step in the conversation, that you can figure out how to manage that situation, because chances are the screamer, the threatener, whoever is going to be in your life at work for a long time. And so how do you navigate that situation where you're getting dragged over the coals? Which unfortunately, I don't think that there's a leader in America who hasn't been in that situation.
Especially now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me wonder if a lot of these archetypes are about feeling these emotions in your body and actually just like giving yourself the space to feel it versus just pretending that you don't. Like, is that kind of the biggest first step, is recognizing like these things are happening and I do have feelings and that's okay?
Yeah, I think that acknowledging what's going on, I mean, particularly in that punching bag situation, acknowledging that you're a feeling person working with other feeling people. And that's really what's driving things. And so leadership theory would suggest that everyone is calm and composed and we're rational beings and we always act in a rational way, but that's just not how people are. And if someone is screaming at you, you will not be rational. It's incredibly unrealistic to think that if the person who controls your job is threatening you and is yelling at you, that you would just be very placid and it wouldn't even ruffle your feathers. So yeah, I do think that acknowledging that you are a feeling machine that thinks is part one. And then figuring out what you're going to do with that though, because one of the things about doubt is if you let doubt be the only thing that you feel, then you might be stuck, right? Like you have to have doubt and then a next step, doubt and then some way of reframing it, doubt and then something that you do to turn a corner.
I love that. Might you walk through one of those archetypes and what the next step looks like? So identify briefly. So I had two that I really liked, the jittery innovator or the instructional imposter. Either of those resonate with you?
Well, look, all of them resonate. So I've been every single one of those archetypes at some point in my career. I think that the jittery innovator is one that will probably resonate with a lot of administrators, but particularly those who have been around really since No Child Left Behind or have been in education since NCLB. Because for the last maybe 2 decades, school improvement plans and innovation plans and this concept of a turnaround plan, all of these things really, really took off. You know, the idea that, well, we're doing everything wrong, and so we're going to do a total turnaround. You know, when you had school improvement grants coming out in the teens, and turnaround principles started to become very popular, and that was a concept of like, I'm going to take over the school and turn it around. And even if we weren't doing that, we certainly had a focus on innovation, right? How are we bringing in technology? How are we bringing in AI? How are we, flipping classrooms? How are we doing new curriculum, new instructional methods? And all of these innovations then, of course, involved leaders creating change plans and selling them to teachers. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Of course, every educator does want to grow and innovate, but there was so much, I think, back and forth and damaging conversations, shall we say, in the way that a lot of change plans were done to teachers. And so as a leader, you sort of have this, all right, how am I creating the change plan and how am I selling it to teachers? So in the chapter, the scenario involves a turnaround principal who comes up with a school improvement plan and is trying to sell it to her staff, who are incredibly resistant because they're jaded. They've seen a lot of change plans over the last few decades, like many teachers and staff in this particular school, as in so many schools. The teaching staff outlast administrators by leaps and bounds, right? The typical principal stays for between 2 and 5 years in most schools around here. And so, the teachers have every reason to think this person is going to come, try and make plans, and then they're going to burn out and go somewhere else. And so in that scenario, the leader is really feeling like, well, here I am, the new person. Staff are expecting me to be on my merry way in a couple of years. But administration and the board really wants me to turn the school around. So I have to enact this massive change plan. I have to innovate. I have to really change things and shake things up around here. And so this particular person needs to think through, how are they creating and selling the change? They need to think through, is it a me thing? Is it I myself am putting all of the responsibility for making this change on my own shoulders? Or is it something where I can enlist teachers' help? And look, I mean, in terms of school change, entire books have been written on that topic. So I'm not necessarily trying to give a blueprint for changing schools. But what I am thinking through is, from that one leader's perspective, how can she stay sane when trying to sell change to a school that doubts her?
Yeah. And what advice do you have?
Well, I have bring in the staff absolutely before rolling out a change plan. So by the time you've created something in the privacy of your own home and then are trying to sell it to teachers, you're dead in the water. So you simply can't do that. You have to make change a group effort so that you have a small cadre of people from the very beginning. And it also will prevent you from going in a direction that teachers and staff know will be reviled, right? So if you have, say, 10 trustworthy people in the room, they can stop you from making a plan that is going to just be hated. The other thing is you want to get local leaders who have good influence with their peers and cultural capital to be able to help sell the plan so that it isn't just one leader in a room doing something to a staff, but it's people who have that social influence casually talking, over the lunchroom or in the hallways or in meetings, talking about what this change plan will do. And then for the leader herself, a lot of it is internal monologues. So if I, as a leader, see myself as the only intelligent person in the room, and it's my responsibility to make other people do things, well, both of those are wrong. So firstly, everything can't be my idea, and I'm not the only smart person. And if I just get my head around that, that will help me then not doubt, because I wasn't expecting myself to be the genius, and so it's fine if I'm not. So the doubt sort of fizzles as soon as you get your head around the idea that it's not all on you.
Right.
Yeah, right. Well, and then I think also looking at school change as something that is continually requiring adaptation and improvisation. So, as a person who loves to make lists and plans, I struggle with this because you have to sometimes abandon plan A and just improvise and get into plan B, and it's fine. If I see myself as needing to drive home one particular straight line of change, I'm setting myself up for failure, and then I'll be doubting myself when I can't force other people to do these things. But if I see myself as someone who's flexible, who can respond to what other people are feeling, who isn't trying to make anyone feel or do anything, but is trying to be an influencer and a adaptable leader, that's a me thing, right? That's something that I'm getting my own head around, and it will dissipate my doubt, because then I'm not setting myself up for failure. So, there's external things, structural things, get the teachers on board, and then there's internal things. How do you see yourself as a leader?
Cool. I think that's so helpful as a deep dive into the one archetype. And it just makes me wonder, after writing all 7, were there any through lines that you kind of saw across them of the mindsets or strategies that are really kind of that come up again and again in this work?
Yeah, I would say one of the mindsets has to do with, as I said, with the innovator. How do you see yourself? So you had mentioned liking the instructional imposters. So that's an administrator who is observing and evaluating teachers that are more experienced and maybe better than he or she ever was. Well, do you see yourself as the only instructional leader in the school, even if you're a principal? Do you see yourself as the only person with anything to offer the teaching profession, and someone who has to be smarter than the teachers, and someone who has to be a better instructor than every single person, including those who have been teaching twice as long as you did? And if you see yourself that way, you're going to fail. Or looking at the struggling salesperson, do you see yourself as someone who has to philosophically agree with every single mandate from the state and the Board of Education and the district and your boss? Because if you see yourself that way, you're setting yourself up to fail. Think of one more. Oh, the mob mollifier. So that's one that I struggled with a lot, because yes, finding yourself faced with 50 angry people and you're standing in the front of the room, that's like the actor's nightmare for me. But if I see myself as a person who has to have the right answer, no matter what question, no matter how manipulative, no matter how disingenuous, no matter how passive aggressive, but I have to have the right answer all the time. And if not that, then a snappy retort, setting myself up for failure, because I'm not a vending machine of information, and I am not necessarily the smartest person in the room. And so why would I act and conceive of myself in that way? So I think that's the first big mindset piece, is setting yourself up in your brain as a learner rather than as someone who must have a suitcase full of perfect skills at every single moment.
I love that you phrase it as a learner and seeing yourself as a lead learner as opposed to just a leader. And I think that is such a beautiful framework, because when you're coming into this work with a sense of curiosity and open-mindedness and empathy, people feel that, as opposed to this kind of authoritarian, I have all the answers. we're all educators at the end of the day. And so I think if we brought that same attitude to our students, there would be failure. So it's like, it's what you want to see in classrooms. You really have to model all the way at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of these require more conscious steps than others. So one that we haven't talked about is the defective empathizer. And so this is for those situations where something that is so extreme comes up. So like one of my real life examples when I was a teacher, I witnessed, and this was in the early teens, a student threw a desktop computer at one of my friends who was a teacher also. And
Oh,
that eroded my ability to empathize with that student. So just for the rest of the year, I couldn't look at that student without remembering that incident. And it really impacted, my confidence, because I thought, am I an awful person? Like I see this, I don't want to see students as a threat. I never want to see the worst in people. But I witnessed this thing happening to my friend. And so I just felt really conflicted. Am I failing my students? Am I failing as a teacher? Or if I'm too forgiving, am I failing my friend? Because my instinct was to try and protect her, right? And so
right.
looking at this idea of being a lead learner, I think it comes down that emotionally charged scenario really, really requires a certain emotional openness and willingness to say, I need to learn how to navigate this in whatever manner is necessary, whether that's, acknowledging the emotions, like you say, like acknowledging that I was angry and fearful, and angry in that scenario, or whether it requires, maybe I need to learn to do some mindfulness or take some breaths in these emotionally loaded situations. Maybe I need to learn some breathing exercises. Maybe I need to learn some sentence frames for talking to students when that happens. Maybe I need to learn some intervention techniques for these situations that might require another adult to step in, because this was my first year of teaching, so I didn't know what to do. But having a few tools in your toolkit and being able to pull them out when the room gets really hot.
Smart.
Yeah.
It makes me think of I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. She's got her Atlas of the Heart, and it's got like a dictionary of emotions. And I have it on my wall because often if I'm feeling a feeling, I don't really know what it is. So I go and it's the, different clusters of emotions, and it helps me to kind of unpack it. And I almost wonder if the archetypes could be used in a similar function of like, ooh, I'm feeling that feeling of self-doubt again, but I don't really know where it's coming from, or I don't know, like, is that how you imagine using them? It's like you could kind of flip through the 7 and be like, oh, this is definitely the one I'm feeling. And okay, this is my next step.
I think so. I mean, almost like a little manual or field guide.
Yeah.
I actually had one of my colleagues here in her first couple of years of administration and just started her first principal role, and said, well, as a new administrator, this was kind of like a blueprint of things to do in different scenarios. And the way that I had written the book initially was to try and have the easiest ones be first. So if you can't do the highest level one, that's fine. But the first one should be something that everyone can do, because maybe it's a little bit more procedural. We're not talking about your own self-image. We're talking about set a meeting with people. Anyone can do that, right? And then once you
Right.
get comfortable doing the easy things, right, like in the jittery innovator, we can all find a cadre of people to be consultants. We can all identify who the people with influence in the building are, and we all know how to use our calendars. So everyone can do
Right.
that. And then once you get comfortable, then you're starting to think through, how can I tackle my own pressure on myself to know all the answers?
Gorgeous. So it really is efficacy beliefs, and it's those giving yourself those small mastery experiences that build the confidence of, yeah, yeah, I think I can do this. I can do this. That's cool that you gave the kind of training wheels for that.
Well, and it is on, I think, all of us individually to reflect through each experience. And so this is one of the fascinating things about leadership, is that you can have been a leader for decades. I mean, I'm in my 13th or 14th year of leadership, and even now getting some of those massive feelings of doubt, it then pressures me in a good way. Good pressures me to think through, all right, what did I learn? What would I do differently? Am I processing these things in a healthy way? So if I bungle a situation, which I do all the time, am I thinking through it in a way where I learn something but don't beat myself up? And that's kind of a fine line, right? And I, like a lot of leaders, am also a perfectionist, and so my self-talk isn't always very healthy. But I'm trying, right? I'm trying to make it healthier, and I'm trying to not use glib affirmations, but not use four-letter words when I talk to myself. So like somewhere in the middle is what I want.
We're all in process.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm also mindful of the time of year because I mean, when we are recording this conversation, it's literally your first day back with students.
yeah.
Um, so you are amazing and a crazy person for doing this. But I wonder about like, is it worse at the beginning of the year, or is the beginning of the year the time to do this work while you have the energy, or does timing matter in this?
No, because I think about the biggest crises in my leadership career, and there is no through line at all as to when they
Mm,
happen. I think, yeah, your role, I think principals feel, well, everyone feels a little more pressure at the start of the year to perform, but I don't know that self doubt necessarily is confined to the time of year. Because some of these things can happen anytime. You can face an angry mob anytime. You can have an emotionally volatile situation anytime. You can feel like an instructional imposter right until June, sadly. But you can. So no, I wish I could tell you a trend there, but I just can't.
makes sense. Do you think is part of the process sharing what you're working with your team to tell them like, hey, I'm feeling vulnerable, I'm feeling the self-doubt? Is that a necessary part, or is self-identifying the more critical part there?
I think it depends on the situation. So I think there are times, actually probably more times than not, when, yeah, working with your team and basically saying, hey, here I am as the elementary principal. I taught high school for several years, and I'm so excited to learn about elementary. I know I have a lot to learn. I'm really excited. I hope you guys will answer a lot of my questions so that I can become an expert like you, but it's going to take me some time. That would be very appropriate. I think there are times when you can do it in a poor way. So, for instance, if you are standing in front of an angry mob and they're winding you up and making you feel overly emotional, or you're getting angry, or you're getting sarcastic, or you're about to cry, I think you have to be very careful about how you phrase that. So imagine if you're in the audience and the leader is about to break down or about to cry or something, because of the missives that are being flung at them. I don't know that everyone in the audience would necessarily see that as a very good lead learner demonstration of vulnerability. But a person who is a leader who is in the front of the room trying to mollify a mob might say something like, I think the emotions are running really high in the room. Maybe we should pull the plug on this meeting. I'll collect questions over here and then we'll reconvene in a different way. If they can say that, that's great. But if they're tearing up and they're saying like, this is making me, I don't know that that's the right way to do it personally. Just knowing how meetings work, as I wouldn't do it that way. So I think modeling vulnerability is one thing, but you do have to think through context and you have to think through what you look and sound like when you're doing it. Does that make sense?
It does, but it's so complex and like
Yeah.
it's hard, I think, because if you're doing this internal work, I think so much of us being lead learners, we want to share what we're working on with our staff. And how do you share this work when it is a little taboo? Like, how do you balance that being the leader with being vulnerable?
Yeah, I would say I have seen very effective leaders talk about personal things they're working on almost before there's an incident. So I know a leader who, has been working on listening, and he often talks about how he's trying to be a better listener, and when he does these 360 surveys so staff can tell him what they notice about, and he's like, man, I always get dinged on listening, so I'm trying to be a better listener. That's great.
Awesome.
And he'll say that apropos of nothing. And that's not a criticism, but just sometimes like in a meeting, he'll just drop like, man, I'm really trying to be a better learner. I'm trying to like work on my skills of summarizing and active listening. And if I have to take notes, that's what I'm trying to do. But it doesn't come out necessarily when he's in a critical situation. It's just a constant. So I see that a lot. And then I think in terms of some of these crises that trigger things, it's tough because thinking about the struggling salesperson, I'm selling someone else's idea that I didn't create, and maybe I don't even agree with it. You can't say you don't agree with it. You
Right.
just can't. because then you're never going to sell it, because now your staff knows you are selling something that you don't agree with. So don't do that, right? But then how do you model that lead learner? And so, like in that scenario, that specific one, I might say something like, this is new to me too, and I'm still figuring it out. I mean, I agree philosophically, and like I'm really trying to kind of get my brain around what this is going to look like. I believe it can work, but I need a couple of the screws tightened over here on this plan. So like, let me get those answers, and then we're going to figure it out together. A lot of it is how you say it. Right. But what you don't do is just throw the whole thing under the bus and like, this is some stupid thing the soup is making it. Like, you can't say that.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I just think back to that of middle leaderships. I was a curriculum coordinator, and the number of times where it was like in those upper leadership meetings, they'd say something and you're like, teacher's going to hate that. Everyone's going to hate that. And you're the one who's in the ground having to be like, guess what, everyone? New change.
And then you're like, I don't know if this is the right answer, but like for me, I have to practice saying some things. And this is the first thing I tell the people on my team if they are struggling to sell something. I literally, if I think that I don't know how to say this, I don't know how to respond to this question, I practice saying it to my friends, to my husband. I practice saying it in front of the mirror so that I can phrase it in my own words and not just be parroting what other people are telling me. And maybe that is the opposite of modeling vulnerability. I don't know, but it's what works for me. And then I feel better after the meeting because I know that I said it in words that sound like me, Elizabeth, talking. And I know that I at least had plenty of opportunity to get my brain around it and to say something cogently. So I'm not just making things up as I go along. Yeah, that's like a tiny tool that has worked for me in one situation, but then I think that's a common situation, so I get a lot of mileage out of it.
Well, and it's just beautiful to know, right? That like this is something that I'm struggling with. This is something that it's natural to feel a little bit icky about and a little bit unsure about. And it is still a skill that I can practice and model being a strong and vulnerable leader. And that like, it's all so multifaceted and there isn't a cut and dry answer, but just having that vulnerability within yourself, that openness within yourself to really feel those feelings. I don't know. To me, it just feels like the meat of all of this.
Yeah. And do you know, I mentioned talking about my team members and trying to help build them up. So one of the biggest rewards really of my leadership career has been now to be able to lead other leaders in a way that maybe helps prevent them from going through some of the things that I did when I was younger and earlier in my career. So there were times, I think, when I was starting out where unintentionally, perhaps, those above me maybe conveyed the idea that if I couldn't do something or if I felt doubt, then I wasn't cut out for leadership. And I remember clearly getting the message through a variety of explicit and implicit communication that, look, if you can't sell this to your department or you can't get that crowd under control, or you can't handle this emotionally charged situation, or you can't give great feedback to someone who's been teaching 5 times as long as you did, then you kind of suck. And that really inflamed the doubt when the people above me did that. But that now that I'm one of the people who's a little bit higher up and I work with younger leaders and I work with people who are in middle management roles, it's been really, really rewarding to me to be like, look, it is totally okay if, and then you don't know what to say or you don't know what to do. Let's think through it. You're scared of the worst case scenario. Let's play it out. Let's just talk about it right here. What if the actual worst happens? What are you going to do? What are you going to say? How are you going to, let's practice. Let's practice taking a deep breath. Let's practice responding to this tricky question. Let's practice defusing that situation and then just letting people know that it's okay if that stuff happens and having them think through it together with me. That's been a big reward for me.
Well, and how beautiful, because no matter what your leadership. So if you're a middle leader, you can do that for the teachers on your team. If you are a senior leader, you can do that for the middle leaders on your team, that we can create this systemic culture of vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's honestly in the book, one of the biggest, I think, themes is keeping it bottled up is one of the worst things you can do. So if you have to start small and you have to start by just talking with a colleague whom you trust, your oldest work friend, maybe someone who doesn't have positional authority over you, if that's where you have to start, that's fine. I think to come back to your earlier idea of should you model that self-doubt for those you lead, that's a high-level leadership skill that I can see some people doing. But if you're just getting your head around the idea of self-doubt, just talk to your friend in the next office, someone you trust.
So smart.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, one last question for you here. We're coming into a new academic year, and your book is in a lot of people's hands this year. What is your hope for kind of the biggest impact that this book will have in the coming school year?
I hope that it makes people feel better at work. And I don't mean in a rah-rah sort of fake toxic positivity way. I mean feel like you're okay as a person. And I don't mean that you know how to do everything and you're going to get them, kid. But what I really mean is like, you're okay. You're not broken because you feel doubt. That's a perfectly natural thing to feel. Just sit with it and know that plenty of other people feel this way. You're not a pariah for feeling this way. I cannot promise that you will be able to do everything perfectly. And I am not promising, that like everything is going to be sunshine and roses. And I'm not at all promising a glib affirmation, but you're okay. You're going to be okay. The doubt doesn't make you a bad person or a bad leader.
Love that. What a beautiful through line for a book. And I just think it's such an important conversation to have. And I'm so thankful that the book exists. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate it.